Hi, folks. I'm Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions, and today I'm joined by three trade outlet reporters who are going to tell us, the PR professionals, how we can do our job better, make their job easier, and serve our clients better. So, if you all can introduce yourselves very briefly, we'll jump right in and kind of tackle this on the year's shortest week.
Do you-
Oh, sorry, folks. Let me start that over. I promise I'm a good host. We had a kid up till past midnight, so let me start over. I'm joined by Joanna, Barnini, and Ross, and they're going to teach us PR professionals what we should do better, like how to host a show. Ross is actually a podcast host for Washington Technology. Um, so, Joanna, if you'd like to go first, introduce yourself, what you do, the kind of different roles you hold, and then Ross and Barnini, respectively, we'll be able to just set the stage for a 1 hour conversation about how PR professionals can do better what we do and how we can help you reach your audiences better with our clients' narratives and our bosses' narratives.
Sure, happy to kick things off. I'm Joanna Fantozzi. I'm a senior editor with Nation's Restaurant News. That's a trade restaurant industry publication. I write a lot about of course, about the restaurant industry, but just kind of from that business perspective, the business owner's perspective. And my major beats include some of the most famous and largest restaurant companies out there, including Starbucks. And I also cover restaurant technology and the legislative and political beats as well.
Ross?
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Ross Wilkers, senior staff reporter at Washington Technology, and it's another trade publication, and our focus is on federal contracting companies and those that provide software, information technology, and other kinds of professional services and support to federal agencies, and that the spectrum of that is very wide. It covers big defense companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, to even those that are known in the big four professional services space, like the Deloittes and Ernst and Youngs, and lots of medium and small business, primarily entrepreneurial and veteran owned in there as well. So, looking forward to the conversation.
Bernini?
Hi, my name is Barnini Chakraborty. I am a senior investigations reporter for the Washington Examiner. I cover a little bit of everything. We've got investigations, but these days it seems like everything from breaking news to longer features to investigations. And lately I've been covering a lot about California. So, what's happening in California, Governor Newsom, how that plays with DC politics and things like that. Prior to the Washington Examiner, I used to work for the Associated Press as well as Dow Jones, and then a bunch of small newspapers. So it's kind of run the gamut.
Now, one of the reasons I'm chatting with you all is you see a lot on LinkedIn where the PR professional has an opinion about best practices, and reporters are often on the other side of that equation. There's often this disagreement. So I thought we would just really look at our view at Proven Media is we help our clients by helping the journalists. We want to put a story in front of you that helps you get a paycheck at the end of the week because it's the one that fits what we call the three T's: the right topic, the right time from someone with the right title. And the title usually doesn't have a C anywhere near it. So what I wanted to really dive into here at the start is what are your biggest pain points? And in our prep call, you all kind of fed off each other by accident. So I hope we can replicate that magic here. Start with, I think it was Joanna, and then it was Barnini, and then Ross in that order. On the pain points that you see when a public relations professional is pitching you, the ones they're trying to solve, and maybe the pain points they create.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of right off the bat, when I get an email pitch from a publicist, if it's very clear that usually we haven't worked together before, but if it's very clear they don't know the publication that I work for or the beat that I write in, and it will be kind of either off topic or geared toward maybe a consumer publication. So something like uh, where people are eating on Valentine's Day. That's just a random one throwing out there. Get a lot of those around around February. And
Mhm.
we would never really write something like that. And so, and another one, I'll add another one in here. Getting my name wrong is another one. But just kind of like right off the bat, basically just being able to do your homework before pitching someone, especially for that first time, in order to it is important in establishing a relationship.
I think that the relationship part is so important because you know exactly who to go to and who to not go to. But some of my pain points, they've been, you've got this great pitch, you've got this big breaking story. This person has pitched you all these great articles, great guests, great folks, and then you're like, perfect place in the story. Let's call them up. No one returns your phone call. You email them, no one returns your phone call. And then that happens once or twice, and then you just kind of hit your limit. You're like, this person may be introducing great topics, great guests, but they're not reliable. And so that's for me, that's kind of one of the biggest issues, especially when it comes to breaking news, when it comes to court cases, things like that. Another thing for me is, when you give a pitch, make it clear, concise, but also noticing a lot lately. And I don't want to out anybody, but I got one recently, a pitch where every single line there was like a mistake in it, and there was random punctuation marks, there were random, misspelling. So just something simple like that, I think goes a long way with a reporter and who they can trust and who becomes their go-to person when it comes to getting sources.
The I made a list of three of them. I guess the first one is understanding the role of trade media and who our audience is. So our audience is employees and decision makers that are actually in the industry that have a lot of basic knowledge already about the industry. So one of the arts of a good pitch to publications like ours is to tell people in the industry something that they don't already know about their industry. That's the difference between trade media and called consumer facing media. And then a second one is this has been applicable this year for WT is a lot of our coverage has focused on the transition to a new administration and decisions coming out of the White House that affect the industry that I cover because companies that we cover, they work for the federal government, and we get a lot of pitches from people that give call it the third party take and analysis on the headline event that's a breaking news. I appreciate that, but as Barnini spoke to, right, you follow up and no one's there to answer, or they say, well, we could talk to you, but it won't be in 7 to 10 days, and then that's an opportunity lost to get your voice in the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, and absolutely. I know what we were talking about before was if it's okay to do an email Q&A. And for me,
Yes.
I was saying that most of
Mhm.
the time I say no to email Q&As. And that is if I'm just looking for a quote, if I'm writing a piece and I'm just looking for a quote from an expert to insert into there, I actually prefer an email Q&A. I'd prefer not to be on the phone with someone, just because oftentimes it's breaking and I just kind of need to quickly insert something. But if I am writing a profile and also if you pitched me, let's say a profile on a person or a company, and then I'm like, great, let's set up an interview. And then you're like, well, they're kind of busy and they're traveling, so is email okay? And I'm like, well, it's really, really hard to get good responses that don't feel canned and don't feel forced, don't feel PR-y,
Right.
over email. And so I generally prefer for in those instances, I prefer phone or Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. When it comes to the breaking news stuff, you got to get something as quickly as possible. So I'm fine with email. Um, but you make a great point. Like when it is an in-depth story, when it's a feature, when it's something that they have pitched and you have agreed to, I don't need to have the interview over email. I agree with you there.
And it shows it's a bit of a bad look, I think, if we're writing a business like the two of us on here are business journalists that com- cover companies. Like it should be in the interest of the CEO or other key decision makers at the companies to set aside 20 to 30 minutes in the calendar for folks to for you to talk to folks like us, and also talk to our audience, our constituency of other industry professionals. Because I mean, yes, you're talking to us, the journalists, but when once the article goes out, or in my case, when the podcast goes out, you're really talking to the audience of industry professionals. That's who you're really trying to reach in that. And I'm sure we'll come back to this phrase a lot during our discussion, but not showing that you're taking it seriously results in a lost opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Now, when you're representing three very different industries, and there's some things that sort of overlap, right? Joanna, you mentioned politics. Barnini is a political reporter, and Ross, government contracting, government shutdown, for example, government policies are impacting that. So let's talk a little bit about being on the nose with a pitch versus being a bit broad, right? So let's look at the shutdown. If you are Ross, that's a major issue, but also you probably got 10x the number, or maybe 50x the number of pitches to actual quotes you could include surrounding that topic. One of the things, obviously, most PR professionals try to do is either get ahead of a known issue, a deadline, a conference, something, the election, whatever, but also trying to dig deep and try to find that unique angle. So when we're talking about an issue that is hot in that week, Joanna, I think you and I met because you did, well, I should say, met on LinkedIn. We met for the first time today. This is the second time I've ever seen you up close and personal. I don't even know where you live, but on Zoom, it feels like it's up close and
I'm in
personal.
Jersey.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay. Well, not that far. I'm in Virginia. Bernie, where are you located, Bernie?
I'm in Virginia.
Oh, you are?
I
Oh,
used to
okay.
be in New York.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So three of us are kind of near each other. Okay. Sorry, Joanna, you're the odd person out. But when it comes into those topics, let's talk about about anticipation, but also trying to nail, like, you're all getting so many pitches. Ross, you talked about a stat earlier in our prep call. There are 6 PR professionals to every journalist, and that number is probably going to increase in the wrong direction over the next few years. So when you get something in advance versus something that's maybe a stronger pitch in the substance, but you're so buried trying to handle it. Look, can we kind of riff on that for a little bit? Which you prefer, which is easier to handle, which brings more value to your audiences, because there's also your time. Your time is so valuable as a journalist when you're trying to put out multiple articles a day.
I can start a little bit on this. So you mentioned the ever fun topic, right, of government shutdowns and transitions to a new administration, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot for a journal to cover. I mean, literally, I'm personally not. I cover a different aspect of it for industry, but some of my colleagues, like literally, we could be doing this right now, and one of my colleagues at another publication that's more agency centric than I am, they'll get the text and say, "Hey, press briefing in 45 minutes on how agencies are managing, to go through it." Right? That's a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the first basic advice is that if the response is not immediate from a reporter about the pitch, please, 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 please do not take it personally, right?
Sure.
The news cycle is what it is. I mean, I'm doing this right now, so I don't know who's texting me, right? But like, there could be a briefing at 6 o'clock on the eve of a government shutdown about contingency plans at agencies, right? So that's something to consider. As far as breaking news goes, and again, this is the context of talking about trade publication, and we're talking to industry professionals. Our job is to help those professionals do their job better, manage their business better. So, whatever pitch you may have, always have that in mind. And whatever the pitch is, it certainly helps in the body of the pitch to contextualize what your person wants to talk about within the parameters of that headline topic.
Yeah, I think for when it comes to something like breaking news that affects that affects not just the industry that I cover, restaurants, but also just like the greater United States, at which I am kind of the reporter on our team that tends to do those stories. I am looking at, okay, like, so I wrote a story, whenever that was, uh, about a week ago, week and a half ago, when President Trump lifted the food tariffs on certain countries. That actually is something that probably impacts the industry, our industry, more than the government shutdown. So we ended up
Yes.
doing a lot more on that. And when that happened, I was just scanning my inbox. I was kind of searching my inbox for different organizations within the restaurant industry who said how this is impacting the restaurants. And that's, I was just like plugging this into my story and just kind of like the National Restaurant Association, or as I like to say, the other
Mhm.
NRA, and various other industry organizations. And I'm just quickly looking for this in my inbox. I don't really have, because it's a breaking story, I don't necessarily have time to do to do a phone interview, or to kind of take a more in-depth look, or to look at kind of pitches for the future, or for next week, let's say. Like, I definitely want to do that right now, do that story right now.
I remember when I was a journalist, it was a political issue. There had been a bill, I think, passed. And my bosses wanted all the reactions from all the big groups, but also the smaller groups that don't necessarily have the PR staff and the media savvy to be ahead of the game. And I quoted everyone. I reached out to one person for comment because I was ordered to. This person had a unique story to bring to the conversation. And I think she got back to me like 6 hours later at like 8 p.m. I emailed her at like 2. And she said, "Oh, in the future, can you give me more like I think time?" And I said, "No, no, no. This is a breaking story. This bill passed. We need to get the story out so our readers understand what's going on. We can't wait that long." And I felt bad. Like, you need money and attention to get resources, and you need resources to get more money and attention. And I felt really bad for this person. But the reality as a journalist is I had to put out 3 articles that day. And
I totally agree with
this
you.
was the most important
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I've seen that over and over again, where you do have breaking news, you do need something very quickly. And
one.
then when you go to somebody who you're even trying to, they get back to you so late. It's really frustrating. But that goes also back to the relationships that you form with PR folks, those that you can count on, those that you know that I have a story that I need a response to in an hour. I know that you can get it to me. So that's who you tend to go to more versus folks. And especially when we're talking about breaking news stories, I get all these great ideas from all these great pitches from PR folks, but they don't advance the story. They'll send it the next day, these pitches, and that's not what you need. I mean, and it would have been great 24 hours ago, but
Mhm.
this is a great angle. But I see that more and more, and that's unfortunate.
Oh, I get emails oftentimes in response to stories. They'll be like, "We saw you published a
Oh,
story on
God.
X. I
Please
have a
don't.
great source for you." And I'm like,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
just wrote it."
yeah.
Yeah.
I,
If
oh my gosh.
if those pitches, if those pitches do kind of the opposite of what Barnini said or did it right, where it's taking a look, story breaks, we get it out, right? Pitches that do point us to the more medium term or long term, we'll call it effects or themes of what to watch. That may be something that we'll pick up on in the second or third wave of attention because
Right.
maybe this will go against what I spoke to earlier, but a lot of industry professionals, and this is certainly true in federal contracting, right? They're very much like heads down. What do I have to focus on, today, right? And they don't often think about the bigger picture, and that's where second and third wave coverage comes in, and thinking about the medium term or long term issues. As far as the short term dynamic goes, trade publications that tangentially touch federal government, or in my case, directly touch the federal government, right? Keep in mind, PR pros, that you are competing for airtime with industry associations that have direct connection, direct dialogue with the legislative branches, and because they have their constituency as companies and they're representing them on their behalf to the White House and Congress, they tend to come to the front of the line in terms of what voices get in for coverage. So that's just something to keep in mind.
One of the things that I said last year on LinkedIn, I've said it privately, but I said it publicly for the first time, was that relationships don't matter in PR. And a couple of folks had heart attacks on my side of the table. And what I found interesting in our prep call, and then even in the 20 minutes we've been live right now, is Barnini and Joanna especially, but yourself too, Ross, have mentioned relationships a lot. Let's dive into that for a few minutes because a couple of folks, Alex Dudley and Chase, have pushed back on this relationships don't matter phrase. And I didn't mean it literally, I meant it somewhat rhetorically. But I think it was also a sort of PTSD reaction from having spent 5 years hearing founders and CEOs and CMOs say, well, what relationships do you have in this industry? I don't have any. PR is an industry neutral skill if you know how to do it. And then they wouldn't hire my firm. We were pretty new, so we also hadn't built out a proper brand and credibility. But there was such an emphasis on we're going to hire a firm that has relationships, not on building the storyline, knowing how to do a pitch, knowing how to prep for an interview, and all the fundamentals that we're talking about. But then I do think about the fact that last year I called a reporter and I was able to get in touch with that reporter and say, do you want to see this first? Well, the reporter calls me and says, hey, we've worked together. I know the person. I don't have their email. Can you put me in touch with them for this story I'm doing the next week? So when you talk about, we always say that stories are more important than relationships, that relations are built on the stories. And that's what you've all said here. But how often do you find yourself going to the person that, the PR professional, the publicist, who can deliver the quote, the interview, the op-ed, whatever you're looking for on, say, a 3 to 7 day turnaround? How often is that relationship really important?
80% of the time, I would say, maybe even higher than that. Because I know, before, when we were doing the prep for this, in between that and now, I looked at my email. I think it was like 200 pitches today from folks. I just don't have the time to go through 200 pitches. I know the people who are going to deliver good pitches because I have a relationship with those people. And I know that they know who I am, what I need, and and they're going to pitch me stories and ideas and folks who will help further the story. And honestly, it's just for me, it's a little bit of a time card. I just don't have the time to go through 200 pitches, and they might be great pitches, but the folks that have consistently delivered are the folks that you kind of go back to, especially when it comes to breaking news. That might be different for, lengthier stories or for investigation pieces, but for the day to day, you got to go back to the folks that you know who will deliver, or you're just kind of spinning your wheels.
Yeah, I would say that relationships, I agree, Bernini. I think relationships matter. I do think that they are rarer, I would say. Like they're probably not as common. Like of those, let's say 200 pitches in my inbox, I probably have an actual working professional relationship with a few of them, and I think also, I think we need to remember that PR and journalist relationships, I think when they work best are kind of are just like the epitome of that working professional relationship. I think sometimes people make I've seen journalists do, sometimes journalists make mistakes of becoming friends and buddy buddy with publicists. And I think that can be, obviously you do you, but I think it can be challenging because I've seen people say, well, I feel like I kind of have to do this story because I know her or I know him. And so I think you kind of have to toe that line when you're forming these relationships to have them just be reciprocal professional relationships and not feel like you're obligated on either end, not feel like you're obligated on either end to accept pitches or to write about certain things just because you have a relationship with them.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm saying at all. I don't go
No,
out
yeah,
and
totally. Yeah, no,
with
that was
yeah
knock on you.
with these folks, and
Of
I
course.
don't feel obligated to write anything, but it's just like the well of folks that you know that are going to be able to deliver for you.
those important people that come through.
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly.
For somebody that has, let's say, we'll call it like 50 to 60 companies in my coverage universe, the relationship is easier to cultivate if they're a public relations person at that company.
Mhm.
Um, that's just how it is. Because I mean, not that anything is wrong with the agency world or the third party public relations firm that has a clientele. It's just easier to reach out to somebody who works for the company and the executive that I know about that. Because I mean, think like it. They have one client. It's
Right.
like like I mean, I'm just picking on you, Dustin. If you were,
I am the agency
why not?
person in here, so yes, go
Why
ahead.
not? If you were the lead public relations person at Lockheed Martin, just to pick a random company that's not so random, right? It's just easier to do that because you have one client there, not 50.
Well, as you're talking, Ross, it occurs to me that I don't think you've ever, we'll talk about this more in a few minutes, but you've probably said yes to 40% of the pitches I've sent you in the last 5 years. I've probably sent you 40 or 50, but I just realized you've never contacted me. And it's because you know that I'm not a I don't run a GovCon specific agency. You can't rely on me if you're looking for a breaking story because you don't know what my client set looks like. Whereas you can go to the Lockheed Martin, and it doesn't matter who answers the media at email because their client is always going to be Lockheed. So as you said, easier to build that relationship that way with the big player. Now we have a question here from Susan. And by the way, everyone else who's watching, please bring your questions, bring your insights, bring your opinions. Um, Susan says, I struggle with this. If my PR agency isn't doing the pitching, it's up to me. What works best? How do I rise to the top of that stack of 200? I don't have the relationships our PR agency does. So I have my own answer, and I'd love for you all to push back or give separate answers. I have a whole philosophy surrounding subject lines. There's a whole art to that. We have to be between 47 and 63 characters, really about 8 words. And those words, the way I describe it is whatever that content is, it's an op-ed, a press release, an interview pitch, whatever, that summarizes a much bigger topic. The press release about a conference is covering millions and millions of dollars of people coming. The first paragraph covers the press release or the op-ed. The headline and subject line cover the first paragraph, summarize the first paragraph. So that subject line, Susan, is really what's most important here. And depending on the editor or the reporter you're working with, I know Ross, I'll put his name on subject line. With Barnini, we met through Quoted, so I just saw the thing and hit reply and shot you a note. But with an op-ed editor, I have submission or op-ed pitch. I'm very subtle. I have all caps pitch or submission. And I think it's all about that subject line and making sure that you are attention getting, ideally counter narrative, counterintuitive, but also it doesn't seem like you're over promising. And that's hard to do in that 8 word window that you have.
That's kind of a big thing for me. They do have some folks, it's very tricky, and I would not want to be in Susan's position. But you do have to make something that is so eye-catching and not for a promise, because there have been so
Mhm.
many times where you look at a subject line, you're like, this is fantastic. You get
Right.
halfway through it and you're like, this is nothing what the subject line. And that's one of like we had been talking about it earlier, one of like the big no's.
Frustrations.
Yeah, that's one of them. It's you've just wasted
Mhm.
both of our times.
Mhm. Yeah, no clickbait.
No.
For sure.
Yeah, I would say to get my attention in my inbox if it's not someone that I have a relationship with currently, I think that just being concise is really important.
Mhm.
I so many times get pitches from publicists that are like 8 paragraphs, and I'm like, my eyes glaze over. Even if it could be a great story, and it's really hard to kind of tell because we're really busy. We have a lot of emails in our inbox. And so it's really hard to tell sometimes if you're like kind of writing your whole life story or client's whole life story. I think also, leading with the news for me, like the news angle, the news hook. This is actually something that's interesting in that I've been kind of following the conversation between publicists and journalists, kind of, I think, thanks to LinkedIn's algorithm. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
exactly,
been coming up
Joanna.
a lot. And
Yep.
something I've been noting is that a lot of publicists will write posts about how you should steer away from the timely pitch and kind of go into kind of more the evergreen, and that's how you get journalists' attention. And maybe that works for some people. I don't know. For me personally, I really need that. Yeah, you're shaking your
No,
head too. I
no,
really need that timely angle or pitch. Why? And why am I writing this now? Why,
right.
how, when, etc.
And also the pitches, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump
No, no,
in.
no, you didn't
But
interrupt.
but the timing of when you send the pitches too. If the world is collapsing, don't send me a pitch about a story that isn't very, very important to the story that I mean, don't pitch me. And that's another thing. I mean, I think that it's really hard for PR folks because they do have to navigate. They have to navigate um, what is taking our time away from it right now. They have to like make sure that they pitch a story in a sweet spot time where we're not going crazy with deadlines and we can actually
Right.
have the time to look at it. And that's really hard. But that is how so many good pitches I think go I just can't get to because I'm too busy doing covering breaking news, and then when I'm done that breaking news there's something else, and your pitch might be great but it was just sent at the wrong time and I didn't get a chance to look at it.
Yeah.
The Go ahead, Ross. I'm sorry.
This one thing that's really helpful for us to filter, maybe not good pitches, but let's call them like relevant pitches versus the irrelevant, is if you're pitching somebody as, say, an expert in the field, a biography really helps of that person because there some are missing that. And I also like to see if they've had anything published before, like
Hmm.
elsewhere,
Yes.
right? Or
Mhm.
even if they've spoken at a panel at a event with others and it's on YouTube, send me that link as well because I mean it's an interesting and I'm the one that wears the hat of a podcast host. It's an interesting art and science when I do that interview to speak
Right.
to somebody if I don't know what they look like and I don't know what they sound like. I can do it, but it creates an interesting dynamic when we're recording on forums like this.
I want to share my post from last week on subject lines.
Mhm.
This is a quote I got from Ryan Grimm, who was with The Intercept. He was at the time the DC bureau chief for HuffPost. And I had met him when I was a political journalist. And I thought I was wondering, I didn't know what he was going to say. I was writing my first ever piece on subject lines 7 years ago. And I got that and I was like, oh, good. All right. My theories are still sound. And I think that, to everything we're talking about, this was a headline we did or a subject line we did earlier this year after the LA fires. It was an outlet that we'd never heard of until that day. It was I don't remember the name of the outlet. I think it was Special Events Magazine. And it was because our client was attending a conference 30 miles from the fires and was donating to support those after the fires. And I thought this story was dead. We sent it to a couple of different outlets. And 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, we heard back and said, actually, we're doing a feature story on that fire and how it affected conferences. And the client got in. This was a little long, but notice the close of my post. I think it was Barnini who said it. Your pitch better deliver on the subject line or you're especially dead. And yeah, that wastes everyone's time more than anything else because you got the journalist's hopes up that there was going to be a legitimate story here, and then you didn't deliver.
Mhm.
Let's see. Monica has a question of what percentage of successful pitches are exclusives? I, on top of that, I'd love for y'all to answer that. When I was a journalist, it really wasn't that high. Um, but I do wonder, what would you all define as exclusive? Because as a PR professional, I try to be creative without being dishonest about it. I'd love for you all to kind of discuss Monica's question plus what do you consider an exclusive pitch?
I didn't know that there were other definitions of that. I will
Yeah.
say it's
Well,
just
all right.
it's I will say so I do know what you mean though, and I know what you're getting at because I have had this be kind of confusing and a little bit of a bait and switch in pitches sometimes where they'll say exclusive story, and what they mean is you're exclusively getting this story from me. This is where you're getting this story from. What they didn't mean and what I assumed, and this is how I guess they probably thought it was a bait and switch because they probably thought it would catch my attention, is this is exclusively for you. Um,
That's not what I meant. I have a whole, no,
okay.
no, no,
Yeah,
no.
no, it's
Whoa. That's a
yeah.
whole different level of bait and switch.
Yeah,
That
no, but
really is.
generally that's kind of what I think of as an exclusive. And I often find I was actually thinking about exclusives, and I usually find that as a trade publication, I don't know, Ross, if you feel this way, that I do not get them often because I think that publicists love, this is my hot take. I think that publicists love trade publications. I don't think their clients do. That is my hot take. Because, right,
Yeah.
it's like because this has happened to me a couple of times and I feel awful for the PR person that this happens to and I do not blame them, but sometimes they'll pitch me an exclusive and then they'll come back and they'll say, "Oh, it's always CNBC, by the way." Sorry, love CNBC. It's always CNBC though. They're always like, "Sorry, actually our client really really wanted to go to CNBC first, but you'll have first exclusive trade You'll
Right.
have the first trade
Yeah.
exclusive. And I feel bad because they clearly wanted to work with us for the first art
Right.
because maybe they have a relationship with Nation's Restaurant News. But yeah, it's happened to me a couple times where they'll renege on an exclusive offer.
So that needs to be that conversation about consumer facing media
Before the
or
pitch.
trade media. It needs to be an ongoing dialogue and conversation between PR practitioner and client about the different roles. And look, again, I don't have anything against CNBC either, right? Like, I mean, they actually have a defense and space journalist there that they do a good job covering it. But you have to remember as part of that, right? Like their audience is for primarily investors and day traders with maybe some business leaders mixed in, right? But their intent and motivation for reaching that outlet is probably different than reaching, say, the audiences of industry professionals that Joanna and I are trying to reach, where we're having a different conversation than maybe what the likes of CNBC and Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, you name it, that they're trying to facilitate for their audience.
Well, that's a really good point too, because a lot of times the client will say, we want this, and well, yeah, but maybe your spokesperson isn't ready for that outlet, whether they have the training, the background, the credibility, but also to your point, if I want to reach investors, I want to go CNBC. But if I want to impress my government customer, I want to go to Ross. And so that's a very different conversation that it's having. So to your point, Ross, it needs to be ongoing, but it also needs to be done before poor Joanna gets that pitch too.
Yeah.
It needs to happen earlier. And I want to clarify what I meant by creativity with exclusives, just to be clear here. I wasn't doing any of the bait and switching you're talking about, Joanna. But some years back, we had a client. They were an Austria-based technology company, and I did exclusive where there was a company they had. I said you're exclusively in English. They pitched an exclusive to the company that was in some other language. So we're able to be clear about those distinctions, and I felt we weren't being unethical with that. Or I've offered an exclusive interview. You'd be the first to get the interview with the spokesperson, with the CEO or the inventor, whoever the spokesperson is. Another outlet might have the exclusive access to the press release that has the key, some of the key information. So I feel like we're not doing bait and switch, but we're offering different portions of the announcement exclusively to different journalists. Would you all consider that a problem in that context?
It's never great, but
Okay.
you
I
know,
guess I think we should have asked that feedback privately, not recorded.
but but I understand that PR folks have to like get the story out to as many people as possible, and if that means, kind of parse it, cutting up that exclusive, then that's what it means. But sometimes, one of the more frustrating times when you get exclusives are when they just tweak one sentence from or
Oh,
one quote. I mean, that's so frustrating. So you
yeah,
end up going with an exclusive, and then it's just two or three
right,
words from what they put in the press release 5 minutes later.
right,
So I don't consider really those exclusives when it comes to stuff like
right.
that.
Yeah, it used to frustrate me when I would put a exclusive quote in a story, and then later I see it as it's on their website, and I don't
Right.
even, we didn't get credit for it because it ended up on their website without a citation for us.
Yeah, I would like something as part of the ongoing dialogue that we recommend PR practitioners have with their clients, i.e., not don't wait until the pitch is ready. Have these thematic conversations before the pitch. Is that the press release that you're giving the journalist in advance of a any kind of conversation? You have to treat that press release as more talking about themes of what you're trying to get across to the audience as opposed to sticking the conversation right to that release. I'm just using it as basic homework for 20 to 30 minutes for conversations that maybe a little bit about the release, but some of the other homework that I've done on that company's website. Just prepare yourselves for that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
A tool or tactic, I don't know what you necessarily call it, but that goes hand in hand with exclusives, I think, are embargoes. A lot of I
Yes.
think that you speak to a different, every journalist has a different opinion on embargoes. I know some that are like, I know some people that do not respect embargoes. Personally, I do. I I find that they're very, very common these days. I'd prefer them to be less common. But I don't have an issue with it if it's kind of adding to that. If there's a value add. So if you're like, this news is embargoed until tomorrow, Friday, whenever it is. Um, and we're giving you an interview and we'll set up the interview, then that's great. Then that's, I appreciate the heads up then, right? However, if it is I have a company, I won't name them, but I have a company that I write about, one of my beats, a restaurant company, and they have a habit of saying this news is embargoed for 3 weeks from now, and it's just basically a new menu item. And so they're not really offering an interview or anything like that. And I might even forget to write about it. I have to put it on my calendar because I'm gonna forget. And so I feel like, and on the other end of the spectrum, I find that embargoes that are sometimes they go hand in hand with exclusives. They'll be like, we want to give you the story on this, we want to give you the exclusive on this, and this embargo lifts tomorrow at 9 a.m. and it's like 4:45. I'm like, I know I am not the first outlet you came to. If you're reaching out to me at 4:45.
I agree.
Yeah, sometimes that's just because we're buried, to be fair. But yes, you're not wrong, Joanna. I suppose the other side of that is when a journalist reaches out a half an hour before
Yeah.
deadline and says, "Oh, I
Yeah.
want a quote," and it's like, your boss said, "Hey, you have to reach out because we're going to slam them and say that we, did not respond by deadline."
So we've
Um,
met before. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Bernini, we've talked a lot about restaurants and GovCon, but you're in the political, and you're really in the conservative political sort of trade space, if you will. How do you see your world a bit maybe differently than the what would be considered the traditional industry trades? Because you are reaching a combination of professionals, political professionals, political advocates, etc., who are maybe amateur but heavily educated. But also you do reach a lot of sort of the average person. How do this conversation, your past work in trades, how do you how do you see that different in kind of the conversation that you have to have with your editor, with the people you're contacting in terms of being precise versus accessible?
A little bit of both, really. I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking.
Sure. So you can be really nerdy with you have to be nerdy and like really dialed into the trade, right? You can't go to
Right,
Ross and say something broad. It has to be very specific.
right.
And I'm sorry, Joanna, I keep referencing Ross because I've placed stuff with his outlet before. But I know that, when you go to Ross and you say CMMC certification, it can't just be cybersecurity generally, but CMMC certification, what companies need to know is how I got a co-author op-ed, right? But with the wider public, I might have had to lead with cybersecurity in the military, right? And that would be a broader topic because, and so it's a sort of a diffuse message because it's reaching the more public, less educated public. In your case, you're reaching people who are really in the know about California politics, conservative politics, but also the Washington Examiner has a much wider reach into the general public. So how do you balance that need to be sort of nerdy about the political side and really dive in deep, but also remain accessible?
I think you just have to, I mean, you have to consciously make that decision that you have to, your audience is so wide that you have to be able to reach both sides of it. Like you can't, I think that's just a conscious decision that you have to make, that you have to appeal to both. And you have to be really, you just have to be conscious of it. And it is something that we are conscious of. I mean, we can't get too wonky in the stuff that we report. And so that's constantly a thing. I just a few weeks ago we were doing redistricting stuff in California, and exactly, I see the eye roll because that's a lot of the eye roll that
No, 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 it wasn't an eye roll. That was just I have sympathy for you
oh.
because it's such a big deal. Among everything else, it's such a big deal in politics.
Right. So, but you have, so you have to like sort of um determine like who is going to make this really
Mhm.
sometimes boring topic, more palatable for folks. And so you have to like weigh that with um, I need an expert to talk to me about what is actually going on with redistricting and things like that. So it is a conscious decision that we make, and we try not to weigh down the story as much as possible. And I think that's a little bit different because that does not allow us to go as deep into topics as I think that the other panelists are able to go to with trades. And that's unfortunate for us.
And it's so interesting because the more I've gotten into trades, I've always really liked the trades, but I think it was Joanna who said this something. The client doesn't necessarily see the value in the trade. They want to go to CNBC. And at the end of the day, though, seeing there's so many more trade outlets and trade reporters than there are national media outlets covering that beat. And the chances of coverage, whether it's a mini influencer or a micro influencer, like who has 3,000 followers on Substack, but is still doing legitimate independent journalism, or someone at an established organization, it does seem like trades do are getting more respect in the last, say, 3 or 4 years, but it's still that ongoing struggle. Um, Joanna and Ross, how do you see that? How do you get that kind of information, like kind of those instances of where trades stand with clients? And Joanna, you made the statement earlier about they're seeming to want to go with CNBC. Do you see the opposite? Do you see where, you know, this client really wanted CNBC, but Joanna, we were prioritizing you, or they have finally been educated on the fact that you bring more value than a Fox News, or no offense for me, an Associated Press who has to stick, more
Going on the
broad.
whole resume.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Um, Trying to think of if there's ever been an instance where maybe a publicist has pushed back or a client has recognized the value of of the trades. I think it does happen sometimes. I'm blanking on right now a specific example. But it's definitely understandable because I think it's more exciting and you feel like you get more of the general eyeballs kind of on about your company and on your brand, let's say, for the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNBC. People recognize that those names. Whereas whenever I tell people that I'm a journalist and they say, "Who do you write for?" I
Right.
generally lead with, I always couch it. I say, "You probably never heard of it, but."
Yes.
because it's a trade publication. But I do find that, just in general, and this is not me tooting my own horn, it's just in general with the B2B world, is that I do think that we tend to get stories ahead of, if it's not like breaking news stories, tend to get stories and understand trends and
Mhm.
implications of larger stories ahead of some of the mainstream outlets. I always laugh when I say I find that the New York Times tends to be when it comes to restaurant trends, New York Times usually is about a year behind. What was it the other day? They said something. I don't know. I feel like they wrote about how they wrote about virtual restaurants being not as much a thing anymore about 2 years after after
Yeah.
uh after I was writing that, and it's always just kind of funny. So it's I think it's something that you kind of learn to deal with, but you do wish that there was a little bit more maybe prestige associated with the trades and B2B, but it's obviously understandable why it might not necessarily be the case.
I think that would be really interesting to look at a sampling of trade association coverage on key issues in, say, 5 industries and see how ahead they are on trends.
They
I-
absolutely are.
yeah, I mean, I never thought about it
Already.
like that, but it's so obvious. It's
But
so
by, I mean, what Joanna was saying, by a lot there, you see a lot of the education outlets, you see a lot of, and they are ahead of the curve by a lot when it comes to, and that's where I see a lot of, you were talking about the New York Times. Yeah, that's where a lot of the reporters go to look for in-depth stories. Unfortunately, it's on the backs of the work that's been done by, the trade magazines.
so
Yeah.
I am go ahead, Ross. I'm sorry.
Do you want to reach the casual business news consumer, or do you want to reach fellow industry professionals in your field, fellow business leaders in your field that you want to partner or establish
Mhm.
a relationship with? Not just me, but your fellow CEO and your fellow founder that reads the trade publication. Think about that.
So I got to wrap in a couple of minutes, as I told the panelists before the call, and you all heard when I botched the opening. I got a sick kid who was up till after midnight, so I'm trying to keep kind of focused. But I want to close on how Joanna, you have a column and you do sort of other reporting, right? And Ross, you have a podcast and you do other reporting. Just quickly, can we just kind of end on, Bernini, when you're covering California, but you still have other things you're covering too. How to think through as a PR person, oh, I want to get in Joanna's column. I don't necessarily want to get covered in a different way. Or Ross, I know you're reporting of a podcast. How should a PR person differentiate? They've done their research. They know what you're covering. Is it Ross interview opportunity? Is it Joanna for your column? I mean, again, I'm very subtle. I'll put something like that in the subject line. But is there a different way to go about it, a better way to go about it for that differentiation?
I think that differentiation is great because it helps, it really does help the reporter who's like looking at it very quickly. I can't speak on their behalf, but yeah, if you tell me this is for this story, look at this pitch. Awesome. Great. Looking at this pitch. And that shows that the PR person has done it's what Joanna has talked about earlier, which is the PR person has done their homework on the reporter. They know what they're covering. They know that they're going to give tailored pitches, and that's always welcome.
I love tailored pitches. I love when people reach out. I have like a couple things I do. So one of them being my tech tracker column. But I will say just to please, please, please make sure that you know what is in that column, podcast, whatever the case may be, instead of assuming. Because I'll sometimes get pitches. They'll be like for tech tracker. Do you want to interview this like talking head about, whatever about AI and technology? And I'm like, Tech Tracker is all the news that has happened in the past month in restaurant technology. I am not going to interview a random person talking about trends. It's not like a trends report or anything like that. And so I think it's really important that if you are kind of tailoring your pitch, just to make sure that you definitely are know that you've done that homework, as you said.
Right.
Yes, being the resident podcast host here, I'd say that it's easy to tell in the tailored pitches who has listened to the back catalog of episodes and who has not. And so I like if you say in the email, I listened to the episode with such and such, or these three, it helps. It helps show that you do your homework. For at least for Wash Text podcast, tailoring the pitches around breaking news, trying to get into the podcast, that's practically speaking, that's probably not something that we can accomplish because of the time that it takes to do scheduling and backlog. And plus, there's the fact that I work with a newsroom of 8 to 10 reporters that are covering the breaking news, right? So they're going to be the voices that I prioritize if we're going to talk about that. But certainly for the evergreen pitches, looking at the medium or long-term horizon theme of a topic, that certainly can go on the idea draft board.
That was a really good way of distinguishing differentiation, because I was thinking just simply, column versus podcast versus, but you're right, Ross, right? I forgot that when you interviewed myself and Katie earlier this year, I think it was 3 weeks. So yeah, you're not going to do breaking coverage. And to your point, Joanna, you're covering the last month of news, not tech trending in. And so those are key differentiations on the nature of what's going on there, even beyond just what you cover. But it's, oh, hey, Ross, do you cover breaking news on your podcast? No? Okay, then I know to never pitch you a breaking news podcast interview ever again. So, folks, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. And I haven't gotten the reporter perspective in this way in a long time. So I really appreciate this. And thank you all for taking the time to do it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care,
Happy
folks.
Thanksgiving.
Be well. Yes, back at you.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.